The rain had been falling since before dawn, heavy and unbroken, soaking the Montana Valley until the earth itself seemed to sigh under the weight of it. Clouds pressed low against the mountains, turning the world gray and narrow. Caleb Hart stood near the window of his small log cabin, watching the river below swell beyond its usual banks. He had lived beside that river for 7 years, long enough to know when it was calm and when it was dangerous. Today, it was both angry and alive, tearing at its edges as if trying to escape its own path. Caleb was a man in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, quiet, and worn in ways that had nothing to do with age. His dark hair was streaked with early gray, and a long scar ran from his collarbone down beneath his shirt, a gift from a war he rarely spoke about. He lived alone by choice, or so he told himself. The land did not ask questions. The river did not care where he had been or what he had done. It simply flowed. He had just turned back toward his workbench when the sound reached him. It was faint at first, nearly lost under the roar of rain and water, but it carried something sharp that made his chest tighten. A cry. Not an animal. Not the wind. Human. Afraid. Caleb froze, every sense alert. He listened again, heart pounding. The cry came once more, thinner now, carried from the direction of the river. He did not pause to think about the danger. He grabbed his coat and stepped into the storm. Mud pulled at his boots as he ran downhill, rain stinging his face. The river came into view, wide and wild, choked with broken branches and foaming water. Then he saw her. A woman was caught against a fallen tree near the bank, her body half submerged, her arms wrapped desperately around a thick limb. The current slammed into her again and again, dragging her lower each time. Her dark dress clung to her, torn at the seams, heavy with water. Her hair was loose and plastered to her face, hiding most of her features, but he could see the panic in the way she fought to keep her head above the surface. "Help!" she screamed, just before the river pulled her under. Caleb kicked off his boots and ran straight into the water. The cold struck him like a blow, stealing his breath and nearly knocking him off his feet. The current was stronger than it looked, twisting around his legs and trying to drag him downstream. He forced himself forward, fighting through pain and numbness until he reached the fallen tree. He grabbed the branch with one hand and reached for the woman with the other. Her fingers slipped from the wood as he caught her wrist. She was lighter than he expected, but the river made her weight feel doubled. When he pulled her close, he realized one of her legs was trapped beneath the water, wedged between branches. He took a deep breath and went under. The river was dark and full of debris. His shoulder slammed into something solid, pain flaring, but he ignored it. His hands searched until they found her ankle. He pulled hard once, twice, until it came free. The force nearly tore his arm from its socket, but the leg released. They broke the surface together. The woman was limp in his arms, her head falling against his shoulder. Caleb wrapped an arm around her chest and fought his way toward the bank, each step a struggle. By the time he reached solid ground, his muscles were shaking with effort. He laid her down on the muddy shore and checked for breath. For one long moment, there was nothing. Then she coughed, weakly, water spilling from her mouth. Her body shuddered as she gasped for air. Caleb let out a breath he did not know he was holding. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and wild. She stared at him as if he were another danger. "Don't," she whispered, trying to push herself back. "Please don't take me there." "I'm not taking you anywhere," Caleb said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're safe." She shook her head, panic rising again. "Not town. Please." Her legs gave out as she tried to stand. Caleb caught her before she fell, steadying her with careful hands. She stiffened, fear clear in every line of her body, but she did not fight him. "My cabin's close," he said. "You'll freeze out here." After a moment, she nodded, too weak to argue. Inside the cabin, the warmth hit them both. Caleb guided her to a chair near the fire and added more wood to the flames. He turned away, giving her space. "You need dry clothes," he said. "I'll stay over here." She hesitated, clutching her torn dress around her. "I won't be any trouble," she said quickly. "I'll leave as soon as I can." "You'll leave when the river allows it," he replied. "Right now you rest." Later, she sat wrapped in one of his spare blankets, her hands trembling around a cup of coffee he had set beside her. Her dress hung near the fire, dripping onto the floor. The light from the flames revealed a bruise forming along her cheek and scrapes on her hands. She stared into the fire as if it might swallow her thoughts. "My name is Caleb Hart," he said after a while. She looked up, studying his face as if measuring the truth in it. "Eleanor Pike," she answered softly. Night fell heavy and close. The storm did not ease. Caleb laid his bedroll on the floor and told her to take the cot. She did, exhaustion finally pulling her under. The fire burned low as the hours passed. Caleb lay awake, listening to the rain, when her voice broke the silence. "Mr. Hart." "Yes." There was a long pause. Her breathing was uneven. "If I need to change again," she said, barely louder than a whisper, "will you stay?" The question struck deeper than he expected. He stared at the ceiling, jaw tight, understanding more than the words alone suggested. Fear. Shame. A life that had taught her safety always came at a price. "No one here is asking anything from you," he said firmly. "Get some sleep." She turned away, and a quiet sob escaped her despite her effort to hide it. Caleb did not move. He lay there, listening, knowing the river had carried more than floodwater to his door that day, and that whatever it was not finished with either of them yet. Morning came slowly, thin light slipping through the cracks between the logs as the storm finally weakened. The river still roared, but its fury had softened into something watchful rather than wild. Caleb was awake before dawn, sitting at the small table with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He had not slept. Every sound from the cot made him tense, not from desire, but from an unfamiliar sense of responsibility that sat heavy in his chest. When Eleanor stirred, she did so quietly, as if afraid the cabin itself might react to her presence. She sat up slowly, wincing when she put weight on her injured leg. Caleb noticed the movement and stood at once. "You shouldn't push it," he said. "I've had worse mornings," she replied, forcing a small smile that did not reach her eyes. He nodded, accepting the answer for what it was. He handed her a plate of bread and eggs without comment. She thanked him, then ate with careful politeness, every movement measured. They shared the space like strangers passing on a narrow trail, close but cautious. The river did not fall that day, nor the next. Rain returned in short bursts, keeping the valley closed and the road impassable. Eleanor stayed because she had no other choice, yet she behaved as if she were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She swept the floor, cleaned the hearth, and insisted on helping despite her limp. When Caleb told her to rest, she shook her head. "If I stop," she said once, "my thoughts get louder." He understood that more than he cared to admit. In the quiet days that followed, pieces of Eleanor's past slipped out without her meaning them to. She spoke of her husband in brief, careful sentences, never using his name. She mentioned debts that were not hers, land taken by men with papers and guns, and a brother-in-law who watched her with open dislike long before her husband died. Each detail was offered like a fragile object, ready to be taken back if judged. Caleb did not ask questions. He let her speak when she chose to speak and stayed silent when she stopped. His own past came out in the same way, slow and uninvited. One evening, when a thunderclap echoed through the valley, he flinched hard enough to spill his coffee. Eleanor noticed, her gaze steady but gentle. "The war?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he answered, and nothing more. At night, sleep came unevenly. Eleanor sometimes woke shaking from dreams she refused to explain. Caleb sometimes woke reaching for a rifle that was not there. Neither commented on the other's fear, but the knowledge of it settled between them, creating a fragile understanding. On the fourth day, a rider appeared on the far ridge. Caleb saw him first and stiffened, every old instinct snapping to attention. Eleanor followed his gaze and went pale. "That's him," she said. "My brother-in-law." The man did not approach the cabin, only watched for a long moment before turning his horse and riding away. The message was clear enough. He had found her trail. That night, Eleanor finally told the rest of her story. She sat at the table with her hands folded tightly together, knuckles white. "I wasn't legally married," she said. "The preacher promised to file the papers. He never did. When my husband died, his family said I had no claim to anything. Not the house. Not the land. Not even my own name." Caleb listened, jaw clenched. "They said I stole money," she continued. "But it was mine. I saved it to leave. To protect my child." Her voice broke on the last word. She pressed her lips together, fighting tears. "Our baby was born too early," she whispered. "He lived for one day." Silence filled the cabin, thick and heavy. Caleb stood and walked to the window, his hands shaking with an anger he barely kept contained. He had seen many kinds of cruelty in his life, but this one felt personal in a way he could not explain. "They're saying the sheriff is looking for me," Eleanor went on. "If they take me back, I won't come out again." "You're not going back," Caleb said flatly. She looked at him in surprise. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. That night, Eleanor fell ill. Fever took her quickly, stealing her strength and clarity. She tossed and turned, muttering broken sentences that spoke of fear and guilt. Caleb stayed by her side, changing the cloth on her forehead, holding her wrist when she cried out. Once, in the early hours, she grabbed his hand with surprising force. "Don't leave," she whispered. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She slept then, deep and still. When she woke the next morning, the fever had broken. The river had lowered just enough to be crossed with care. Eleanor stood by the door, wrapped in one of Caleb's old shirts, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I could go," she said softly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Caleb studied her for a long moment. He thought of the empty years behind him, the quiet nights that had felt safe but hollow. "You can stay," he said. "At least until you decide what comes next." Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by something else. Hope, fragile and uncertain. Outside, the river continued its steady flow, carrying away the last of the storm. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood the truth forming between them. Staying was no longer just about safety. It was about choosing not to run, even when the past came looking. The days after Eleanor chose to stay no longer felt borrowed, yet they were never careless. Summer moved gently through the Montana Valley, warming the soil and softening the scars left by the flood. Eleanor's strength returned slowly, her limp fading into little more than stiffness when the evenings grew cool. She filled the cabin with steady purpose, not as a guest, but as a woman reclaiming her place in the world. Caleb noticed how her shoulders no longer curved inward, how her voice grew firmer, how her eyes lifted instead of searching the floor. For Caleb, the change was quieter but just as deep. He worked the land with renewed focus, repaired fences he had ignored for years, and found himself thinking not just about surviving the coming winter, but about how two people might endure it together. He still woke from dreams of gunfire and smoke, but now there was someone who noticed, someone who would sit nearby until the shaking passed without asking him to explain what could not be explained. Peace, however, was never permanent in the West. Trouble traveled faster than rivers and settled longer than storms. One afternoon, a rider stopped at the edge of the property, dust clinging to his clothes and unease in his eyes. He did not dismount. He simply delivered the message and left it hanging in the air like smoke. Eleanor's brother-in-law had been speaking freely in town. He claimed she had stolen money and fled justice. The sheriff, tired of disputes and eager to appear firm, was listening. Eleanor heard the news without tears. She folded the last shirt she was mending and set it aside with deliberate care. "I won't disappear again," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "If I run now, I will always be running." Caleb met her gaze and nodded. "Then we answer them," he replied. "Together." They prepared carefully. Caleb checked his horse and gathered papers he had kept from years past, records of honest work and land boundaries. Eleanor packed the small pouch of money she had saved, proof that survival was not theft. When they rode toward town, neither spoke, but their silence was shared, not empty. The town greeted them with narrowed eyes and whispered judgment. Eleanor felt the weight of every stare but refused to lower her head. Inside the sheriff's office, accusations came quickly, sharpened by gossip and old prejudice. Eleanor answered each one with clear truth, her hands steady despite the strain in her chest. Caleb stood beside her, his presence quiet but unyielding, correcting lies with facts and refusing to be drawn into anger. The door burst open before the matter could settle. Amos Pike entered with 2 hired men at his back, confidence twisting his mouth into something cruel. He spoke loudly, certain of his power, mocking Eleanor's words and questioning her worth. When he reached for her arm, intending to drag her forward as proof of ownership, Caleb stepped between them. The room erupted. A fist struck. A chair fell. One of the hired men drew a gun, and the sound of its hammer echoed like a death sentence. Time narrowed to a single moment. Eleanor saw Caleb turn, saw the danger in his eyes, and acted without hesitation. She lifted the revolver she had taken from the table, aimed with shaking hands, and fired. The shot cracked through the room. The hired man fell, wounded but alive. Silence followed, thick and stunned. The sheriff stared at the scene before him, the truth finally clear. Amos was disarmed, his lies unraveling under the weight of witnesses and evidence he could not erase. He was taken away in cuffs, shouting threats that rang hollow now. Caleb collapsed moments later, blood seeping from his side where a blade had found its mark in the chaos. Eleanor caught him before he fell, her voice breaking only once as she called his name. The sheriff sent for a doctor, and the town that had doubted her watched as she refused to leave Caleb's side. The weeks that followed were slow and difficult. Caleb's wound healed stubbornly, pain lingering long after the danger passed. Eleanor nursed him with patient devotion, cooling his fever, feeding him broth, and whispering reassurance through the nights when his dreams returned him to darker places. He woke each time to find her there, real and steady, anchoring him to the present. When he could finally stand again, They returned to the cabin by the river. Autumn had begun its quiet work, painting the valley in gold and rust. The river flowed calmly now, its surface reflecting the sky instead of threatening it. Eleanor stood at its edge one evening, watching the water move past as if carrying away pieces of her old fear. "I used to think this river wanted to take everything from me," she said softly. "Now it feels like it gave something back." Caleb joined her, taking her hand without hesitation. "It gave us a chance," he replied. They married a week later beneath a wide cottonwood tree, with no audience but the land itself. There were no speeches, no fine clothes, only promises spoken simply and kept honestly. Eleanor smiled as she spoke her vows, not as a woman rescued, but as one who had chosen her life freely. Caleb's voice held no doubt when he answered her, his past no longer a weight dragging him backward. Their home grew slowly, built on patience rather than urgency. Days were filled with work, evenings with quiet companionship. They spoke of the future in careful terms, planting plans like seeds and trusting time to do the rest. The ghosts they carried did not vanish, but they learned to live beside them without fear. On clear nights, they sat on the porch and watched the stars rise over the mountains. Eleanor would lean into Caleb, and he would wrap an arm around her, the gesture easy and sure. They did not need grand words to define what they had found. The river flowed on, steady and unchanged, while their lives moved forward together, shaped by loss, strengthened by choice, and held firm by the simple truth that staying, once chosen, could become its own quiet kind of freedom.